So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
The Detroit Lions have entered wave 3 of the NFL's free agency. The stages where after the NFL draft, you go out and you get the last couple of pieces, the last couple of small guys that could potentially be the thing that puts your roster over the top in the 2024 season. Whether that be missing out on a player in the draft, whether that be getting the last missing piece of a player you were waiting for and were waiting for the value to fall, wave 3 of free agency is officially underway. And across the NFL, we've seen guys like Tyler Boyd be signed. We've seen a couple of smaller players move teams, and the Detroit Lions are starting to take part in that, as a few days ago, the Detroit Lions ended up signing 2 players from the free agency market, that being free agent CJ Moore, who plays the safety position and special teams ace, as well as the defensive line position, addressing it with Kyle Peko, most recently of the Tennessee Titans. Now, starting off with CJ Moore, Lions fans know who this is. The special teams ace from a season ago. CJ Moore was great for the Detroit Lions for his 4 years in Detroit, right? 48 tackles on special teams, 1 interception in 2021, and played over 69% of special team snaps in each and every one of his 4 seasons with the Detroit Lions from 2019 to 2022. He was phenomenal. He was great on fake punts. He was great on coverage. He was great on kicks and punts and returns, and he was a phenomenal player. I would argue one of the best special teams players on the Detroit Lions roster for 4 straight years before unfortunately being suspended in the 2023 season. Obviously, CJ Moore had his issues, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, but as far as a singular player goes, as far as a player in his impact on the football field, I think CJ Moore was an extremely underrated member of the Detroit Lions secondary, an extremely underrated member of the Detroit Lions special teams unit. After losing one of their best gunners from a season ago in Chase Lucas, I think the Lions go out and they get a pretty much 1-to-1 comparison and a 1-to-1 replacement, as they have brought in CJ Moore essentially to replace Chase Lucas as a gunner and as a coverage man on special teams. The only difference, I think CJ Moore is a little bit quicker, a little bit faster to get down the field. And I do think that CJ Moore is going to be involved a little bit more in some of the fake punts that the Detroit Lions try to pull out. And with that being said, I think the Detroit Lions currently have one of the best special teams units in the NFL, with, of course, adding CJ Moore, with Jalen Reeves-Maybin coming off of an all-pro season, with Sony Vaki being a premier special teams player for the NFL and a premier prospect for the special teams, with you having guys like Khalil Dorsey returning. I think that Brandon Joseph was a really, really good player on special teams a year ago. You have a great long snapper who made a Pro Bowl before. You have Jack Fox, one of the best punters in the NFL. You have Michael Badgley, who's not, I wouldn't say a top kicker in the NFL, but still a solid kicker, along with James Turner in competition for that as well. Now they could potentially take that job. And I think the Detroit Lions have a really strong special teams. You have Khalif Raymond, kick and punt returner, who's really, really good. And really now the special teams doesn't have any holes, on top of having a top 6 offense, on top of having hopefully a very improved defense. I think CJ Moore comes in and he makes the special teams that much better. And even though he's probably not going to contribute to the defense, he's not going to contribute to the safety room, he unfortunately kind of does come in as the third safety, depending on what they're doing with Sony Vaki. And while I don't think that's necessarily great depth, I do think it is better depth than what we had. So it adds a little bit of safety depth, a ton of special teams contribution, and a great player on a 1-year contract. Now, CJ Moore, as I said, missed the 2023 NFL season, and many of you know that it is because he violated the NFL's gambling policy. He bet on NFL games in 2022, got caught in the offseason, and was forced to face a full season suspension in 2023. right? It's the same suspension that knocked out Quintez Cephas for a year. It's the same suspension that knocked out a couple of other Lions and a couple of other members across the NFL. But as of the last week, CJ Moore was officially reinstated in the NFL and is being given a second chance. And it is not unlike Brad Holmes to give second chances in the NFL. Whether you're a first round pick that didn't work out, whether you're a player that maybe didn't quite have the right go around your first go in the NFL. Brad Holmes is known. He's notorious for giving second chances. And despite CJ Moore being suspended, which is something that Brad Holmes typically strays away from, he's not suspended because he broke the law. He's not suspended because he, had some criminal offense. He was suspended because, he violated the NFL's policy, but he did not break any laws. There was no law that said you can't gamble on NFL games, just a rule within the profession. So there is a little bit of a gray line there. And I do think giving CJ Moore a second chance is the right move. He's a great player, is probably a really good person off the field based off the fact that he's never really been in legal trouble. So he is the type of player that the Detroit Lions want in the building as far as a personality, as far as a hard worker, as far as a grit player. He is the type of player that the Detroit Lions want. And I think this is the type of thing that Brad Holmes isn't afraid to give second chances on, isn't afraid to say, hey, if you can stay on the straight and narrow, if you obviously don't go back to that well and you don't place more bets on NFL games as a player, which is still stupid, you can still play on this roster, right? And I think that if he makes that mistake again, if CJ Moore gambles for a second time, he's on the way out. He's out the door. But if he can stay on the straight and narrow, this is a great pickup and a great special teams depth piece for a special teams that was already really good a season ago. Now, the second player that the Detroit Lions have officially signed is Kyle Peko, most recently of the Tennessee Titans, but in his 7-year NFL career has played games with the Denver Broncos for 3 years, the Tennessee Titans for 2 years in 2 different stints, funnily enough, the Buffalo Bills as well as the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, Kyle Peko is a player that I personally don't really see making the roster. I don't see the upside to Kyle Peko that necessarily have him over either, obviously, Aleem McNeil or DJ Reader, but I also don't really see the hype of him making it over guys like John Kaminsky or even a guy like Broderick Martin or Mekhi Wingo, but I do think he'll be a really solid special teams piece on the interior of the defensive line, as over his 42 games, he has about 56 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, 2 passes defended, 1 forced fumble, and 2 sacks, both of which came in the 2021 season, in his first season working under defensive line coach Tyrell Williams, who currently resides as the Detroit Lions defensive line coach. Now, the Detroit Lions, I'd say they have some depth issues at defensive tackle. Obviously, DJ Reader and Aleem McNeil are great. I think that Broderick Martin could take a step forward this year. You have a couple of tweeners in guys like Josh Paschal as well as John Kaminsky. You have, Mekhi Wingo, the rookie that's coming in. So you have a little bit of depth for sure, but I don't think adding Kyle Peko necessarily is a bad option, right? I think it adds a little bit of depth for the preseason, adds a guy that can take a lot of reps in the preseason, show what he can do, but I don't think this is a guy that's necessarily going to ever make the roster. I think this is more of a camp body. This is more of a depth piece for a short-term gain, a guy that as a veteran could potentially help the young guys learn what Tyrell Williams is teaching, help the young guys learn, how to transition into the NFL a little bit in a very similar vein as to what Christian Covington did for the Detroit Lions a season ago. A long-term veteran with the Chargers and the Texans, spent the preseason with the Lions, but didn't end up making the roster, but was pretty good at implementing what the NFL was like for some of the young guys, was helping Aleem McNeil develop a little bit, helping Broderick Martin make his way into the NFL. I think that's kind of the role that Kyle Peko is going to be. He's going to be a guy that shows everybody, this is what Tyrell Williams likes. This is what we're doing. This is what he likes to teach. This is how we're going to do things. And I think he's going to be kind of a sub coach, being a guy that, again, knows the Tyrell Williams system and is going to help those other guys transition and become better. But unfortunately, I don't think he's going to end up making the roster, potentially as a practice squad guy, but probably not ever as a big-time rotational piece. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. That is the big update of Detroit Lions signings of both Kyle Peko, the defensive lineman from Tennessee, as well as CJ Moore, the safety and special teams ace, most recently of the Lions, but of course coming off of that 1-year suspension. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about these two signings, what you would either grade them as free agency signings, or whether you think one, both, or neither of them will end up making the final 53 when it's all said and done. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think about these signings. But with all of that being said, that is life for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.